I hired her for housework, got taken hostage by desire. The arrangement. The advertisement appeared in exactly one newspaper, buried in the classifieds between estate sales and lost pet notices. Discreet household assistance, long-term placement, no references required. Damien Crowe had been staring at his kitchen's growing chaos for 3 months when he finally called the number. The woman who arrived 5 days later looked like she'd stepped from a Victorian photograph. Celine Ashford introduced herself in a voice that reminded Damien of distant thunder, her handshake cool and brief. She wore charcoal gray, her dark auburn hair twisted into a severe bun, and she carried only a single leather valise that seemed too small for a live-in position. "The contract specifies complete privacy," she said, producing a document from her case. "I work dawn until 10 p.m. I require no days off. You'll barely notice I'm here." Damien's mountain estate had 30 rooms overlooking a valley that disappeared into morning fog. He'd inherited it after the accident, the one that took his expedition team and left him unable to set foot outside without panic attacks. For 2 years, he'd lived like a ghost in his own home, his once celebrated cartography business reduced to digitizing old maps from his studio. "The East Wing is yours," he said, signing without reading. "I work late. Don't disturb me." "Of course, Mr. Crowe." That first week, Celine was a whisper in the house. Damien would find breakfast prepared exactly how he liked it without ever hearing her in the kitchen. His laundry appeared clean and pressed. The studio he'd forbidden her from entering was somehow always dust-free when he arrived each morning. But it was the small impossibilities that began to unsettle him. His chronic migraines, the ones that had plagued him since the accident, vanished on her 3rd day. The house maintained perfect temperature without him ever adjusting the ancient heating system. And every night at midnight, a cup of tea appeared on his desk, still steaming, tasting of bergamot and something else he couldn't name. Something that made his nightmares recede and let him sleep dreamlessly for the first time in years. On the 10th night, Damien pretended to sleep, but waited instead.
The revelation. Midnight arrived with its usual silence. Damien watched through half-closed eyes as his studio door opened without a sound. Celine entered carrying the tea, her movements fluid in the darkness. But something was wrong with the shadows. They moved independently of her body. While Celine set the cup down, her shadow stretched across the wall, reaching toward Damien's desk like a living thing. It caressed the maps he'd been working on, and where it touched, the ink seemed to glow faintly before settling back to normal. "You're awake," Celine said, without turning around. Her voice had changed, deeper, with harmonics that made his chest resonate. Damien sat up slowly. "What are you?" She finally faced him, and in the moonlight streaming through the window, her eyes flashed silver for just a moment. Her shadow writhed on the floor between them, agitated. "I should leave," she whispered. "Answer the question." Celine's careful composure cracked. She sank into the chair across from him, and for the first time since arriving, she looked fragile. "I am a shadow walker, from the Twilight Realm. I was exiled 3 years ago for refusing to feed on unwilling creative souls. The agency, it's a parole system. They place us with humans whose life force is already dimming. We're supposed to feed slowly, carefully, until there's nothing left." Damien's hands gripped the desk edge. "You've been feeding on me?" "No." The word came out anguished. "That's the problem. You were supposed to be easy, isolated, depressed, already halfway to fading. But when I arrived and felt your essence..." She looked away. You weren't dying from lack of will, Damien. You were drowning in grief, and I wouldn't. The migraines, the sleep. I've been giving you my own energy instead of taking yours, healing you with what little I have left. Her laugh was bitter. I'm starving myself to death, and I can't seem to stop. The studio felt too small suddenly, the air thick with confession. Damien stood and crossed to where she sat. Up close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly. Why? Celine looked up at him, and the raw hunger in her silver-flashed eyes made his breath catch. Because you're brilliant and broken and beautiful, and every day I'm here I fall deeper into something my kind has no name for. Because your creative essence tastes like starlight, and I would rather die than consume it without permission. And if I gave permission? Her shadow surged toward him like a wave. Don't offer what you don't understand. But Damien was already understanding more than he should. The pull between them wasn't just her hunger, it was something mutual, something that had been building since the moment she'd walked through his door. 3 weeks of careful distance that had really been 3 weeks of gravitational inevitability. Show me, he said quietly. Show me what you really are. Celine stood slowly. Her shadow expanded around her, and for a moment Damien saw her true form, something between human and living darkness, beautiful and terrifying. When she spoke, her voice layered with echoes. Last chance to send me away. Damien reached out and took her hand. It was ice cold and trembling. I spent 2 years wishing I'd died in that avalanche with my team. You gave me a reason to wake up. If you're starving, then feed, but not like a thief in the night. Take what I'm offering freely.
The surrender. The transformation started with her shadow. It wrapped around Damien's wrist where he touched her, cool and solid as silk. Celine's eyes went fully silver, her pupils elongating as centuries of restraint finally shattered. Once I start, then don't stop. She moved with inhuman speed, pressing him back against the desk, her mouth finding his with desperate hunger. But this wasn't the violent consumption she'd described. This was worship. Her lips traced his jaw, his throat, each kiss drawing something from him that felt like light being pulled through his skin, not painful, but so intensely intimate that he gasped. I can taste your creativity, she whispered against his collarbone. Copper and ink and mountain frost. God, Damien, you're exquisite. Her shadows wound around his arms, his waist, not restraining but steadying as his knees buckled from the sensation. She was feeding, yes, but somehow he felt more alive than he had in years. Every pull of energy was answered by something flowing back, her essence mixing with his, twilight bleeding into dawn. Damien's hands found her hair, pulling it free from its severe bun. It cascaded down in waves of dark auburn, and when his fingers tangled in it, her control fractured further. She lifted him onto the desk, scattering maps and instruments, her body pressed against his as shadows danced across the walls in patterns that looked almost like words in a language he didn't understand, but his body obeyed instinctively. Tell me to stop, she breathed, even as her hands worked the buttons of his shirt free. Tell me this is too much. Instead, he pulled her closer, offering his throat to her lips. Take everything. I trust you. The words broke something in her. Celine made a sound between a sob and a moan, and then she was consuming him in earnest, not his life force, but his loneliness, his guilt, his 2 years of self-imposed isolation. She drank down his nightmares and replaced them with something warmer. Her shadows caressed every inch of exposed skin, learning him, claiming him. Time became meaningless.
Minutes or hours passed in a haze of whispered confessions and desperate touches. Damien discovered that when he kissed the hollow of her throat, she tasted like midnight storms, that her shadows responded to his desires, wrapping around him exactly how he needed, that she could make him unravel with nothing but a specific tone of voice, commands in her native language that he didn't understand, but his body obeyed instinctively.
The binding. Dawn found them tangled together on the studio floor, surrounded by fallen maps and scattered charcoal. Celine's shadows had receded, leaving her looking more human than Damien had ever seen her, flushed, disheveled, and terrified. "You should hate me," she whispered, not meeting his eyes. "I lost control. I took too much." Damien caught her chin gently, turning her face toward his. "Look at me." When she finally did, he saw his own reflection in those silver-touched eyes. "Do I look diminished to you?" "You look—" She touched his face with trembling fingers. "You're glowing. That shouldn't be possible." "Maybe your kind has been feeding wrong all along." He sat up, pulling her with him. "You didn't take from me, Celine. We shared. I felt it. Everything you gave back." She shook her head. "The Twilight Council will sense what happened. They'll know I've bonded with you instead of consuming you. I violated every term of my exile." "Then don't go back." "Damien." "I'm serious." He stood, pulling her up and crossing to his desk. The contract she'd arrived with sat in the top drawer. He took it out and held it over the studio's small fireplace. "This arrangement was never what either of us needed." "What are you doing?" "Renegotiating." He dropped the contract into the flames. The paper caught instantly, burning with an unusual purple flame that smelled of ozone. "You came here as my housekeeper. Stay as my partner, my equal, my—" "Your what?" Her voice was barely audible. "Whatever we want to call this." He turned back to her, and the vulnerability in his expression matched hers. "I haven't felt alive since the accident. You gave that back to me, not by feeding on my essence, but by caring enough to starve yourself instead. That kind of selflessness deserves more than an employment contract." Celine crossed to him slowly, her shadow moving in sync now, no longer independent. "My kind doesn't do partnerships. We take or we're taken from. This feeling—" She pressed his hand to her chest, where her heart beat with an irregular, otherworldly rhythm. "I don't even have words for it in my language." "Then we'll invent new words." Damien laced their fingers together. "In my culture, we have ceremonies, promises, ways of binding ourselves to another person by choice, not by magic or hunger." "Marriage," she breathed. "I've read about it. But Damien, I'm not human. What we did last night, that created a bond that goes deeper than any human ceremony. Shadow walkers mate for eternity when we share essence willingly. You're marked by me now, and I by you." He could feel it, a new awareness of her humming at the back of his mind, warm and constant. "Good. Then we're already bound by your laws. Now let me bind us by mine." What followed wasn't a traditional proposal. Damien had no ring, no planned speech. Instead, he led her through the house to his workshop, where he'd spent 2 years avoiding his true calling. The room was filled with unfinished maps, blank canvases waiting for worlds to be drawn into existence. "I was a cartographer," he said quietly. "I mapped uncharted territories. After the accident, I couldn't face creating anything new. Every blank space reminded me of the expedition, of the people I lost." He picked up a clean sheet of vellum, the finest quality, untouched. "But you've given me the courage to explore again." He worked quickly, his hands steady for the first time in years. Celine watched as he drew a map of no place on Earth, a territory that existed only between twilight and dawn, with mountains made of shadows and valleys filled with starlight. At the center, he marked 2 points and labeled them in careful calligraphy, D and S. "This is us," he said, showing her, "a place that shouldn't exist by anyone's rules, but does anyway.
This is what I'm offering. Uncharted territory. No maps, no guarantees. Just the promise that wherever we go together. Celine's eyes shimmered with tears that caught the morning light like prisms. In my realm, we seal bonds with shadow and essence. Show me how humans do it. Damien set down the map and cupped her face in both hands. With words and witnesses and time. But we're alone here, so let my words be enough. I choose you, Celine Ashford, every strange, impossible, beautiful part of you. Not as my employee or my captor, but as my partner in this life and whatever comes after. Her shadows rose around them both, gentle this time, like a blanket. I choose you, Damien Crow. I choose to feed on your joy instead of your sorrow, to strengthen you instead of draining you. I choose every morning and every midnight for as long as existence allows. They sealed the bond the only way that made sense, with a kiss that tasted of both twilight and dawn, of shadow and starlight mingling. And in that moment, Damien's studio filled with impossible light as two separate essences became permanently intertwined.
The forever after. 6 months later, the mountain estate had transformed into something between a home and a sanctuary. Damien's photography business had not only revived, but flourished in unexpected ways. His new maps were sought after by collectors worldwide, though none of them understood why certain shadows in his work seemed to move in candlelight, or why some territories he drew felt more real than the places they supposedly represented. "You're doing it again," Celine said from the doorway of his studio, carrying 2 cups of evening tea. Damien looked up from the commission he was finishing, a map of Istanbul for a luxury hotel chain. Hidden in the shadows of the minarets were tiny figures only visible at certain angles, a man and a woman, dancing. Doing what? Hiding love letters in your work. She set down the tea and wrapped her arms around him from behind, her chin resting on his shoulder. That's the 14th map this month with us hidden in it. Can you blame me? He turned in her embrace, pulling her onto his lap. I'm married to my muse. Every map is a love letter now. The wedding had been small, just the 2 of them and a confused town clerk who couldn't shake the feeling that something otherworldly had witnessed the ceremony. Celine wore silver instead of white, and when Damien slipped the ring onto her finger, her shadow had formed a crown above her head for just a moment. They'd learned to balance her nature with their life together. She still needed to feed, but now it was a mutual exchange, moments of intimate connection where they shared essence equally, leaving them both strengthened. Damien's creativity had exploded under her influence, while her exile status had mysteriously changed to cultural exchange program after the Twilight Council realized she'd found a sustainable way to exist on Earth. I have something for you, Celine said, producing a small wrapped package from her pocket. Inside was a compass, antique brass with a face that showed no cardinal directions. Instead, it had only 2 markings, home and adventure. No matter where we go, she explained softly, the needle always points to both, because we're each other's home and each other's uncharted territory. Damien tested it, watching the needle spin and settle, pointing directly at Celine, while somehow also pointing outward toward the mountains. Impossible, but perfect. Speaking of adventure, he said carefully, how would you feel about me actually leaving the estate? There's an expedition to map a newly discovered cave system in Peru. They want me to lead it. He felt her tense slightly, then relax. The nightmares? Haven't had one in 4 months, and I wouldn't go without you. He turned to face her fully. You gave me back my courage, Celine. I think it's time I used it. Her smile was radiant. Then we go together. Though I should warn you, shadow walkers have certain advantages in dark caves. I may make you look bad in front of your expedition team. I'm counting on it. That night, they stood on the estate's balcony overlooking the valley. The sun had set, painting the sky in shades of purple and deep blue, the exact color of twilight where Celine felt most at home. Damien wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, and her shadow merged with his, creating patterns on the stone beneath their feet. Do you ever regret it, binding yourself to something not quite human?
"Every day," he said, and felt her stiffen before he continued. "I regret that I wasted 2 years in isolation when I could have been looking for you sooner." She laughed, the sound like distant thunder, and turned in his arms. Smooth words for a cartographer. "I married a poet made of shadows. I had to raise my game." They kissed as the first stars appeared, and somewhere in the twilight between realms, the Obsidian Court noted that the exiled Shadow Walker and her human had created something unprecedented, a bond that strengthened both parties, that turned hunger into mutual nourishment, that proved love could exist in the spaces between worlds. The house lights came on automatically, but Damien and Celine stayed outside a while longer, mapping constellations and planning adventures, two souls who had found their home in each other's arms. Inside, on Damien's desk, the map he'd drawn on their binding day hung framed on the wall. The territory marked D and S had grown larger over the months, filling with details neither had consciously added. Forests and rivers, cities and shores, a living map of their life together, charting a course into a beautiful, impossible forever.